Welcome to Diabetes Day by Day, the American Diabetes Association's official podcast. For this month's episode, we are going to focus on something new, which is storytelling, or I could have said something as old as language itself, but something new for us, storytelling. We're going to take a step back and shift from informing others to listening to others, because there's power in storytelling and hearing the stories that each of us care to share. Stories connect us. They remind us that we're not alone. They help us see diabetes not just as a medical condition, but as part of a much larger human experience that we all share. In this episode, you'll hear voices from people living with type 1 diabetes, sharing some challenges, perhaps some triumphs, and everyday moments that shape their journey. These are stories of strength, vulnerability, and perhaps hope. I'm Dr. Neil Skolnik, Professor of Family and Community Medicine in the Sidney Kimmel Medical College of Thomas Jefferson University, and joining me, as always, is my co-host.
Thanks, Neil. I'm excited to hear these stories today. I'm Dr. Sara Wettergreen, an assistant professor at the University of Colorado Skaggs School of Pharmacy and an ambulatory care clinical pharmacist.
Joining us today to share some stories is Marlee Seibold, who is the Storytelling Communications Manager at the American Diabetes Association. Marlee also lives with type 1 diabetes. Welcome, Marlee.
Thank you, Neil. I'm so happy to be here.
And our second guest returning to our podcast is Dr. Saige Kiedinger, a recent pharmacy school graduate who is transitioning to a new phase of life in residency training. Saige also lives with type 1 diabetes. Saige, welcome back to our podcast.
Hi, Neil and Sara. Thank you so much for having me again. I am so excited to be here.
Marlee, let's start with you. How did the storytelling focus begin at the ADA? And share with us why you think storytelling is such a powerful medium.
Neil, storytelling has always been helpful to the ADA overall. We've used storytelling in ways for campaigns to highlight American Diabetes Month, to also shed light on camps and the important tools and resources we have. However, in the last few years, we've really shifted storytelling to be a main focus, in large part due to social media, because it's so much easier nowadays to be able to connect with those people online living with diabetes. And you're really able to see a day in the life of someone living with type 1, type 2, gestational, etc. And it's really an exciting time, because before it was a lot harder to connect with someone living with type 1. I mean, growing up, it was a lot harder for me to find others living with type 1, but now as an adult, you can basically search on almost any social media platform and find hundreds of people talking about it. And so it's become a really great way to connect as a community. And storytelling in general is so powerful, because even though all of us are living with the same disease or a similar disease, all of us are having different journeys. Everything works a little differently. Even the tools we use, the tips and tricks we may use, we all have a different response because we're all different people. We all have different backgrounds. And so being able to use storytelling as a way to understand and educate people on all of these different things is really powerful and a really great way to kind of use social media in a positive light.
That's so fascinating, because I hadn't actually, until you said that, connected the dots between storytelling and social media, and that makes so much sense. Saige, you have pretty much grown up in an era of social media. Your thoughts on that?
That's really interesting. I agree with you. I didn't really connect the dots until Marlee said it point blank. But for me, when I was diagnosed when I was 10, so I was growing up when I was 13, Facebook came out. I was getting on Facebook, getting on Instagram. And that is also when I started going to diabetes camp. And so being able to connect with the people at diabetes camp on social media and being in kind of communication with other people that live with type 1 diabetes was really a game changer, especially in high school when you are a vulnerable teenager and very hard on yourself and other people. Just knowing and having some people in your corner, even though you may not see them in person on a day-to-day basis.
I think it's so important because we hear so much about the negative aspects of social media. We do hear how it has led to increased rates, for instance, of depression in teenagers. It's really important to acknowledge there are a lot of positive aspects as well, to be able to find other people who share a similar experience, particularly when what you have isn't what everyone else in your classroom or everyone else at work is experiencing. Marlee, let's shift to hearing about your story with type 1 diabetes. Can you share with us the story of when you found out your diagnosis?
Of course. So I was 7 years old when I was diagnosed with type 1. And leading up to my diagnosis, it was some of those very similar or common symptoms, I should say, of type 1, like drinking a lot of water, going to the bathroom a lot. I wasn't gaining any weight and wasn't really like my mom always noticed that like I was wearing the same clothes that I was wearing like the year prior. And she's like, why isn't she like growing more? And it was actually the weekend of Memorial Day back in 2002, I believe it was. And I remember very vividly being at my like aunt and uncle's for the weekend and going on a walk with my dad and cousins. And I got so tired that my dad had to carry me back. And that had never happened to me before. And of course, we get back and I drink some water and I have a snack and like good to go. But I think that really stuck out to my mom specifically because she's like, why is she going to the bathroom so much? Why is she getting tired all of a sudden? Why are all of these things happening? And so that next week, she took me into just like our pediatrician, I believe. And she thought that I had some sort of urinary tract infection, bladder infection, something like that, because I was going to the bathroom so often at night specifically. And I remember her telling me like, oh, they're probably just going to give you some like bubblegum flavored medicine. You'll take it for a week or so and you'll be good to go. And I was like, okay, great. Not thinking anything else was wrong. And I remember going to that appointment and they checked my blood sugar. And basically the doctor looked at my mom and was like, you can't go home. You have to walk straight over to the hospital and the ER because we think your daughter has type 1 diabetes. And like the doctor's office we were at was connected to our hospital. So my mom was like, okay. And I remember like being very confused, obviously, of what's going on. And my mom was just like walking me over and she's like calling my dad, being like, we're headed to the hospital. This is all we know. No one else in my family has type 1. They still don't. And I have a very large extended family and siblings and all of that. No one else still has type 1. And so my parents had no idea what it was going in. And I spent a couple days in the hospital trying to figure out like what this new world was, what this new life of checking your blood sugar, having needles, insulin every time you ate, and all of these things. I wasn't in DKA yet, which I'm very thankful for, but I think it's just because my mom was very aware of what was going on, and she took me in because she knew something was wrong. She just didn't know what.
I think those diagnosis stories are always so memorable, especially when you hear them. Most people we talk to can tell us their exact diagnosis story. And you even remember Memorial Day weekend, this was the scenario, this is what was happening. Probably some Memorial Day different foods that you wouldn't have as usual that could have spiked things a little bit more too. But it sounds like a very scary experience, and maybe that is part of why it makes it so much more memorable. What do you remember about how you felt in that moment?
From what I remember, I don't remember being scared per se, because I don't think these symptoms were going on for that long prior to it. And I think I was just more confused than anything of like, why all of a sudden is my mom checking my blood sugar? Why am I getting poked with so many needles? Why are all of these things happening before I have dinner, before I go to bed, before all of these things? So it was a very like confusing and scary time in that way. But I think it was just like a moment of my parents being like, you're gonna be okay. Like, this won't stop you from ever achieving anything you want to in your life. We just have to manage it well and everything is gonna be okay. So there was a lot of reassurance in that, but it was still like okay, what do I need to do now as like a 7-year-old who needs a lot of help to manage this disease, but is aware enough that something is off, something is different, something is going on.
Some major life changes going on for sure. And I'm sure that was a lot to process at age 7, but it definitely sounded like you had a strong support system to get you through. Saige, I'm curious, how does that diagnosis story or experience compare with your own story?
Even hearing Marlee go through her story, I've had diabetes for 16 years and I've heard thousands of very similar stories, but every time I hear a new one, I just find myself nodding in solidarity. Like, Same here. I was 10 years old when I got diagnosed, and my date was April 1st. I remember it being April Fool's Day. And I am born and raised in Colorado. And so April 1st is like one of the last ski weekends. And so we went up to the mountains for one last ski trip. My family was an avid ski family. And I couldn't ski. I couldn't ski. I was exhausted. I just want to sit in the lobby and I couldn't ski. And it was really odd. I thought maybe I'm just a little sick or something like that. Time goes on, we go back into town and we go for a bike ride. I can't ride a bike either. I'm saying to my dad, my bike, it has to be broken or something. And my dad's looking at my bike and your bike is fine. Like, you need to work harder. I'm like, my legs aren't working then. I feel weird. And then again, with the same exact symptoms as Marlee and as so many other people with type 1 diabetes, of super increased thirst, increased urination, just losing weight. I remember my parents always being like, gosh, we can see your spine and your ribs, and just always questioning for a few months, like, what is going on? But it wasn't until that ski weekend, that my mom just had a gut feeling, as most moms do, and just said something is wrong. I was the first in my family to have type 1 diabetes, so they weren't fully sure of the telltale symptoms I think we now do a great job of telling people and telling parents to look for. But still, my mom knew something was up. So same thing with Marlee. We went to an urgent care and just thinking that it was be some sort of sickness, maybe a flu. And sure enough, they prick my finger and they're like, oh, yeah, you're going to the hospital. You're not going home. Go home and get a bag. Meet everyone at the hospital. So we got into an ambulance, went to the hospital. And the amount of time I spent in a hospital is really fascinating to me, because I was there for a total of 6 or 7 days, whereas a lot of type 1 diabetics now, they can go into a hospital and they may not even have to stay a night, which is absolutely amazing. But it definitely took me a few days to get all of the education and the training. And same exact thing with Marlee. It's just a full life transition, not only for yourself, but for your entire family, to learn all of these things that they once didn't know.
And similar to Marlee, do you remember how you felt at the time? And there's really two different times. There's the immediate, how did you feel? But then a month or two later, what were you thinking?
Yeah, immediately I was 10. I didn't know what
Yeah.
diabetes was, or I traditionally thought it had to do with eating too much sugar or not exercising. And I'm like, I'm just a little girl. Like, I am healthy and I don't really know what this means. And then I remember being in the hospital and getting teddy bears and learning and oranges and learning how to inject needles and slowly trying to figure this out. But I just remember wanting to be in charge. I was super independent and I wanted to learn it all. I was very active in all of the education. I didn't want my parents and my siblings to have to do it all on themselves. I knew that the second that they said this is a lifelong condition and you don't get rid of it, I was like, okay, then we're diving in. It wasn't until a few months later, I think, it's when the sadness sunk in and the grieving process started to happen. You go back to school after summer break, and then you are missing out on parties, and you can't have the cupcakes with the other kids in your class, and your blood sugar's falling low at recess, and you have to step to the side, and you have to wait 15 minutes for it to come back up. You have to recheck your blood sugar. So it wasn't until a few months later when it really started to sink in that things are going to look a little different for me than everybody else.
Sage, can I follow that line of thought for a minute? Because I think it's so important, because that sadness and a change in one's life is something that most of us experience. How did you get through that?
My family, I think just having a great support system did a lot. My parents are amazing in that they can always find that silver lining in just a storm. And I felt like I was able to always find the silver linings. It was when my blood sugar would fall low in class, I would get to look at my friends and say, I get to have candy right now, and you don't. So getting to pick out the positives, getting my mom made things specials every time I had to go get my A1C checked for my endocrinology appointments. We would go get breakfast afterwards, and she'd bring me to school late. So just finding those little positive moments, and that just made it feel more celebratory and makes you feel special in a good way.
That's so beautiful, and I think there's so much to learn from that. Marlee, let me come back to you and ask you, are there other moments that you remember over your course of diabetes that really stand out?
Of course, I have those moments of like when technology has really made an impact. When I started using a CGM, or when we finally moved from like using a syringe and vial and using a pen, and having that switch of not having to keep your needles cold and all of that stuff when you like go to dinner. That was a huge game changer. But something that has been like really like life-changing was when I found a doctor who was willing to really work with me as a type 1 diabetic. And so like growing up, I did a lot of work with like our pediatrician, and they were very focused on like doing things a certain way. And growing up, I really had a hard time wanting to go to any of those appointments. It wasn't very well managed. I felt like they were always telling me what I was doing wrong, not what I was doing. And I knew I was going to get poked and taken blood drawn and all of that stuff. So then when I went to college, I went to college in a different city from where I grew up, and we found like a new like diabetes specialist essentially. And at my first appointment, she was like, okay, what have you been doing to manage your type 1? And I was telling her, 'cause obviously she can see that my A1C isn't amazing. It could be better. And she was like, okay, why are you doing all of those things? And I remember looking at her being like, because I was told. I didn't know there was another option. I don't know. And she said, okay, let's figure out like a different route that actually works for you, because you're now in college. Your day-to-day isn't the same every day. You're in different classes. You have different activities. Like this obviously isn't working. So let's figure out what will work. And it was like this huge light bulb moment for me, being like, is this what it feels like to have a doctor who just wants to make it work for you, and give you all of the options to make an informed decision? Because that was a game changer. And that was like a good 8-10 years into my diagnosis at that point. So like figuring it out then, I was like, this is how I do better at managing my type 1. There are different ways, there are different options. And I wasn't given those options earlier. And so that changed everything for me.
Boy, isn't that interesting? As we talk about the benefits of sharing experience, I can imagine a lot of people that listen here might be experiencing getting care from someone who isn't fully listening to them. You described, and it really changed the trajectory of your management and your self-care. And it's such an important lesson to remember that to ask, to say, I have a voice, right? And I get a vote in what we do for my care. And when that voice is not listened to, there are choices out there.
Absolutely.
Saige, any things that stand out to you as moments that you particularly remember during your diabetes journey?
Yeah, that is really hard to reflect on, really, because so many thoughts flood my mind on really significant moments. But when I think about it, they all have a common theme. One being that I have to be more willing and open to change, that I need to be flexible in having new doctors and doing this and doing that and changing with technology. And then the other aspect is being honest. And similarly with Marlee, it wasn't until I just started being honest with my providers of this is how I'm doing things. And rather than giving them the answer that they want, because you know what they want to hear, that you're giving yourself insulin 15 minutes before you eat and you're doing all the things accurately. And so then you know that, so you tell them that's what you're doing, even though that may not be true. So then it wasn't until I really was like in college and I just felt like I have to narrow this in, I have to get dialed in, and I'm living by myself and I want to take better care of myself. And so I need to be honest with my providers that the way that their expectations, I'm having a hard time kind of meeting that. And so when you start being honest with your providers as well as the people around you, there would be times where I would be with my friends, my blood sugar would be dropping. It would be 70, 60, 50. And I am just like praying that it comes up magically by itself, because I am too afraid to be honest with the people around me and interrupt what is going on just for a few minutes. And then you realize that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And people are totally fine with things like that. And so just being honest with the people around you as well, and just being open to that.
Something that, as I'm hearing both of your stories, is really standing out to me is the power of choices, but also the challenge of change that comes with some of those choices. Where, in Marlee's situation, finding the right care provider for her meant more choices, but some of those choices meant changes. And for you, Saige, some of those, maybe you had the choices already, but going through each of the choices and changes was a challenge. And what I also heard in that story that stood out to me is that both of these big transitions came for you around that time of college. So we know that as someone living with diabetes grows up and has more independence as they leave the nest, so to speak, and are doing things more on their own and finding their own ways of management, that's a huge transition. I appreciate hearing both of those stories. Now, one thing you alluded to, Saige, at the beginning of your last quote was to talk about those transitions with technology. And when you were in my class, I remember we talked about diabetes technology, and you shared a little bit some of your initial hesitancy in making those big technology changes. Could you share a little bit more about your experience going through that change and how you eventually decided to embrace these big changes?
Yes, diabetes technology specifically is one of my favorite conversations with type 1 diabetes because I truly do think that it's changed my life for the better. And there's some cons with it, of course, but starting at the beginnings, when you first get diagnosed, you're doing multiple injections with pen needles. And for me, that looked like anywhere from 5 to upwards of 10 injections a day. And same thing that Marlee had mentioned earlier, that means bringing new pen needles and alcohol swabs and everything to a restaurant, doing this in public. So about 6 months after my diagnosis, they said, okay, the next step is getting on an insulin pump. And I was like, yes, absolutely. I can just slip that little thing in my pocket and that's going to be easy and that's going to be great. And I loved my pump from the beginning. My first pump was a Medtronic, and it was pink and it was cute and it was fun. People asked me, is that an iPod that's attached to you? And it opened more doors for me to be open and transparent about my type 1 diabetes. So getting my insulin pump, that was great. And it was an easy transition. Then about 10 years down the road, maybe a little less, 8 to 10 years, then the CGM started to come out. And the first CGM that I had tried, you had to wear it and you had to wear it in a certain place. It was extremely uncomfortable. I was in high school when I first tried it, and I was still having to prick my finger 3 times a day. To me, I was just like, I'm just adding another thing. I'm not taking anything away. Also, it was beeping in the class. I couldn't silence it. I couldn't get a hold of it. It wouldn't match up with my finger pricking blood sugars. And so I was just so frustrated. So I did it for 3 months. Took it out and I said, never again. I'm not doing a CGM. That's just not for me. I'm very well controlled with pricking my finger and I have an A1C of 7. And at that time, I thought an A1C of 7, that's our goal. That's great. It's probably not going to ever be better than that. And then once I got into pharmacy school, I was working in a pharmacy. I see all these people getting Dexcom CGMs. I'm like, I should just try it again. People rarely have anything bad to say about it. I tried again, and the first week I'm in love. And I'm like, this has changed my life. Again, I don't have to prick my finger. It's accurate. I feel good. It's not alarming me when it's inaccurate. And within multiple months, my A1C went from 7 to about 6.2. And I was like, oh, it could get better. Like things could get better. And just gaining the insight of eating certain types of things and watching what that does to your blood sugar. It was great for me. I'm such a visual learner. And so that helped me learn about my diabetes so much better.
Saige, can I ask you, because change takes courage. And when you reflect on going back and trying a CGM again, was there something that was slowing you down from doing so? Because you expressed some hesitancy.
Yeah, I think a big part of it was just that looking into it, everyone would mention a CGM, my doctors would mention a CGM, I would just say, no, I'm uninterested. And I wouldn't even let them explain the improvements in the technology in the past few years. I just was point blank, I'm not interested. I don't want to even talk about it. So then when I got to pharmacy school and I'm with other healthcare professionals and all of them are like, why are you not on a CGM? I'm like, that is such a great point. And then Sara is teaching us about them and I'm like, this is crazy. I just need to do it and it's great. And I need to stop resisting just because I was so frustrated by the technology that I had once been burned by in a sort of way.
Yeah, there's some old saying somewhere, once bitten by a snake, a person becomes afraid of rope. And when you have a bad experience with anything, it can get so in the way. And again, it's so wonderful that you shared that experience, because hopefully others out there are listening to you, listening to the frustration, you had the hesitancy, and now the good experience. We're getting astonishingly, to me, toward the end of our podcast, because time seems to have flown by. So we're getting toward the end of our podcast. Marlee, do you want to share any additional thoughts for our listeners?
Even listening to Saige talk about her journey with technology and things like that, I have also had a very interesting relationship to technology. I only started using a CGM about 5 years ago, which was a good almost 15 plus years into my journey. And it was definitely life-changing in the best way, and changed how I was able to manage my A1Cs and all of that. But I actually don't use an insulin pump, and I still do multiple daily injections, and I also use inhaled insulin. Inhaled insulin has been a huge game changer for my management. And I think a big piece of why I never really wanted an insulin pump was the anxiety that comes with it of giving something so much power over you. I like the idea of knowing exactly how much insulin I myself am giving me. I don't like this idea of giving any sort of technology too much power. But I mean, for me, it's like that's what works best. And I'm such a big advocate for people to find the pieces that work for them: a CGM and not a CGM, insulin injections or a pump. All of these little things can change exactly how you manage your diabetes and make it better or worse. And I struggle a lot with just low anxiety as well, like going low and having bad lows and things like that. So I think being able to do MDI and using that CGM in that way has really helped me manage that anxiety, and knowing I'm in control of how my blood sugars are doing in the day. And really, just to follow up on storytelling, I would really encourage people to take a look at our ADA Diabetes Day by Day blog and our entire storytelling page, because that's where we have a lot of written stories of people with any type of diabetes. We share type 1s, type 2s, gestational, pre-diabetes, all of that. We also have the interviews there. You can find other episodes of this podcast on there, and people are able to share their story from there as well. And so hopefully listening to us talk a little bit about how powerful it is to hear other stories and hear what you go through, the successes and the triumphs and the not so great things. I would really encourage people to take a look at that and share their stories if they're willing.
Marlee, thanks so much. And sharing one story is as important as listening to the stories of others, because we contribute to the community. And one of the most important things in life is recognizing we're not alone through good times and bad. And stories is a way of connecting and helping us really not just understand that, but to feel it. Saige, any final thoughts that you have for our listeners?
I guess just some of my final thoughts would just be that remembering that everybody's got something. And for me, that just so happens to be type 1 diabetes. But for somebody else, it could be something completely different. It could be mental, physical, spiritual, but everybody's got something that they are constantly trying to work through. And finding those connections with people and hearing stories that are similar to yours I think it's just so powerful, and being able to remember that the world isn't perfect and all you can do is the best for yourself and for the people around you. So
Beautiful and said so well. Sara, your thoughts?
I love what Saige said. I think just remembering that everyone has their own different experience. And one of the things that I'm really taking away from hearing this episode is the power of choices and having informed decisions be part of your care. So would just encourage our listeners to talk to their care team about choices as they continue through their diabetes journey.
Beautiful. Before I close, as we were talking now, I just thought of a story that I heard not long ago. I actually read in a book called The Big Panda and the Tiny Dragon. And in that book, the big panda asks the tiny dragon, which is more important, the journey or the destination? And the tiny dragon replies, the company. And it has been such a pleasure spending this half hour with all of you, with Marlee, Saige, you, and Sara. And I feel by that company, my life is expanded. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Neil.
To our audience, thank you for listening today. We invite you to join in the conversation. As Marlee said, look online, take a look at the American Diabetes Association's website, look at some stories, share a story or two. If you'd leave us a voicemail with a story or a question you have by calling 703-755-7288. Again, that's 703-755-7288. We'll put a link to the part of the ADA website that focuses on storytelling in the program notes. We hope to hear from you. For the American Diabetes Association, I'm Dr. Neil Skolnik. Thanks for listening.